Is this Vanessa? I thought you should know that Eric is moving in with me tomorrow. He's been promising for months, and I'm tired of waiting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The woman's voice sliced through our perfect family dinner like a blade. My husband's fork clattered to his plate as the color drained from his face. Our 12-year-old daughter froze mid-chew, while our son kept eating, oblivious. In that moment, 15 years of marriage crystallized into a single, unavoidable truth that everyone at the table could now see. I'm Brooke. Your husband and I have been together for almost a year now. The words hung in the air as I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. Our daughter Maddie, 12 years old and too perceptive for her age, stopped mid-chew. Our son Liam, barely 9, kept eating, oblivious to the way our family was fracturing in real time. Across the table, Eric sat frozen, a deer caught in headlights, his expression confirming every word this stranger was saying. He told me he was going to tell you today, said he'd be moved out by tomorrow night. Her voice carried a strange mixture of triumph and uncertainty. But I've heard that before, so I thought I'd make sure we're all on the same page this time. The chicken and vegetables I'd spent an hour preparing now looked like props in some absurd theater production. Thursday family dinners had been our tradition for years. The one night we all committed to being present, sharing stories from our week, reconnecting. Now this woman, Brooke, had made herself an uninvited guest at our table, shattering the facade of our lives with clinical precision. I think you've said enough, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to speak with my husband. I ended the call before she could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Maddie's eyes darted between her father and me, already processing, already understanding. Liam had finally sensed something was wrong, his fork suspended midway to his mouth. Kids, please go upstairs for a bit, I said quietly. Dad and I need to talk. Mom, Maddie began, her face already crumpling. Now please, I said, infusing my voice with a calmness I was far from feeling. As their chairs scraped against the hardwood floor, Eric finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa, I can explain. Not until they're upstairs. I cut him off, unwilling to let him spin whatever story he'd prepared while our children could hear. The sound of their footsteps on the stairs was followed by the gentle click of Maddie's bedroom door. Only then did I allow myself to look directly at my husband. This stranger I had slept beside for 15 years, the father of my children, the man who had apparently been planning to walk out on us tomorrow. A year? The word felt like glass in my mouth. You've been with her for a year? Eric's hands trembled as he pushed his plate away. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it, I demanded, surprised by the steel in my voice. I didn't want you to find out this way, he said, running his hands through his graying hair I had watched change from dark brown over our years together. I was going to tell you tonight, after dinner, when the kids were in bed. The absurdity of his concern for timing made something crack inside me. A laugh escaped my lips, sharp and humorless. How considerate of you. And then what? You'd pack a bag and just disappear while they slept? His silence was answer enough. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the full implications settled over me. Not just an affair. Those can be momentary weaknesses, regrettable mistakes. This was calculated. This was an exit strategy. This was Eric systematically constructing a new life while maintaining the appearance of commitment to ours. How long have you been planning to leave? I asked, needing to understand the scope of his deception. Vanessa, does it matter? It's not working between us. It hasn't been for years. His tone had shifted from apologetic to defensive, as if my questions were somehow an unreasonable intrusion. It matters to me, I said, my voice dropping dangerously low. It matters to know how long my husband has been lying to my face. It matters to understand how much of our life together has been real and how much has been a convenient holding pattern while you arranged your escape. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the ensuing silence. Through the bay windows, I could see our neighbors walking their dog, laughing together, completely unaware that just feet away, my world was collapsing like a house of cards. Since Christmas, he finally admitted. We've been talking about it since Christmas. 4 months. 4 months of holiday celebrations, parent-teacher conferences, weekend trips, and mundane Monday mornings. 4 months of I love yous that were apparently nothing but placeholders. 4 months during which I had actually thought we were doing better than we had in years. My mind raced backward, calculating. If they'd been together for a year and planning his departure for 4 months, that meant 8 months of active betrayal before he even considered leaving. 8 months of coming home to me after being with her. 8 months of lies stacked upon lies. The realization sent a wave of nausea through me. I gripped the edge of the dining table, steady myself against the vertigo of discovering your entire reality is counterfeit. And Brooke, I said her name for the first time, tasting its bitterness. Who is she? Where did you meet her? Eric shifted uncomfortably. She's a pharmaceutical rep. She comes to the hospital for meetings with the medical staff. Vanessa, I didn't plan for this to happen. The hospital, where he'd worked as an administrator for the past decade, where I'd dropped off forgotten lunches and met him for occasional date-night dinners, where apparently he'd been cultivating a relationship significant enough to detonate our family. Does she know about Maddie and Liam? I asked, suddenly terrified by the thought of this woman knowing details about my children's lives. Of course she does, Eric replied, sounding almost offended. I'm not some deadbeat who's abandoning his kids. No, you're just abandoning their mother, I shot back. You're just dismantling their home, their security, their understanding of what family means. His jaw tightened. I'm not happy, Vanessa. Haven't been for a long time. Don't the kids deserve a father who's happy? The selfishness of his reasoning knocked the wind from me. Somewhere upstairs I could hear Maddie's music starting up, her usual method of drowning out our arguments. How many times had she done that, thinking she was escaping normal marital disagreements, not realizing her father was plotting his departure? What they deserve, I said, fighting to keep my voice from breaking, is a father they can trust. A father who doesn't sneak around building a life with someone else while pretending to be committed to them. I pushed back from the table, suddenly unable to remain seated across from him. The diamond ring on my left hand caught the light, and the weight of it felt unbearable. 15 years of promises encapsulated in a band of metal that apparently meant nothing to the man who had placed it there. Where are you going? Eric asked as I moved toward the stairs. To check on our children, who just overheard that their father is moving out tomorrow. I paused at the base of the staircase, turning back to him. Unless that too was a lie? Are you actually leaving tomorrow? Or was that just something you've been telling her to keep her happy? His expression confirmed what I already suspected. I hadn't set a specific date. I was going to figure out the logistics after we talked. So even his mistress was being fed half-truths. There was something oddly validating in knowing I wasn't the only one being manipulated, though the revelation did nothing to dull the acute pain radiating through my chest. Well, now you have a deadline, I said, surprising myself with the cold finality in my voice. She's expecting you tomorrow. I suggest you start packing. As I climbed the stairs to comfort my children, to somehow explain that the foundation of their lives was being ripped away because their father was unhappy, I felt something unexpected beneath the crushing weight of betrayal. A flicker of clarity, of resolve. Eric had made his choice, methodically and deliberately, over the course of a year. Now I would make mine. And unlike him, I wouldn't be building my future on a foundation of secrets and lies. I would face this head-on, with the same strength. I'd always possessed, but had somehow forgotten while playing the role of devoted wife to a man who didn't deserve it. By the time I reached Maddie's door, tears streaming silently down my face, I had already begun to formulate a plan. Eric might be walking out the door tomorrow, but he was gravely mistaken if he thought he could simply stroll into his new life, leaving nothing but devastation in his wake. He would learn that betrayal comes at a cost I intended to ensure he paid in full. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maddie's door was closed, but not locked. I knocked gently, then pushed it open to find her sitting cross-legged. On her bed, headphones clamped over her ears, notebook open in front of her but clearly forgotten. When she saw me, she yanked the headphones off. "Is Dad really leaving?" Her voice was small, her eyes large and glistening with unshed tears. I sat beside her, my own heart splintering as I tried to formulate an answer that wouldn't collapse, under the weight of the truth. "Yes, sweetheart, it seems that way." "For that woman, the one on the phone?" I nodded, unable to dress it up with platitudes. "Did you know? Before tonight?" Maddie's questions were direct, unsparing in their precision. She had always been this way, analytical, observant, unwilling to accept simplified versions of complex realities. "No," I whispered. "I didn't know." A tear slid down her cheek. "So he lied to you, to all of us." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." She considered this, her 12-year-old mind grappling with adult deceptions. "How long have you and Dad been married?" 15 years in August, I said. The anniversary trip we discussed. Just last week, a weekend in the mountains, just the two of us, now revealed itself as another fiction he'd never intended to fulfill. "That's my whole life plus 3 years, Maddie said, as if calculating the exact measurement of the betrayal. "That's like forever." "It felt that way to me too," I admitted. She leaned into me then, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I wrapped my arms around her, rocking gently as I had when she was small. Over her head, I surveyed her room. The science fair ribbons pinned proudly to her bulletin board, the bookshelf overflowing with novels and field guides, the star chart Eric had helped her create last summer. So many moments, so many memories embedded in these 4 walls. "What's going to happen to us?" she finally asked, pulling back to search my face. "To this house? To our family?" The question bore down on me with crushing weight. What indeed? Our life wasn't just emotional connections and shared memories. It was a tangible physical infrastructure that Eric had now destabilized. This 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs that we'd purchased 7 years ago, stretching our budget to get into the right school district. The mortgage with 23 years of payments remaining. The investment accounts for the kids' college. Funds. The joint checking and savings. The health insurance through Eric's job at the hospital. "I don't know all the details yet," I told her honestly. "But I promise you this. You and Liam are my priority. Whatever happens, I will make sure you're taken care of." She nodded, searching my face for reassurance I wasn't sure I could authentically provide. How could I promise stability when the foundation had just been ripped from beneath us? "Should I check on Liam?" she asked, her innate protectiveness of her younger brother surfacing even amid her own pain. "Let me do that," I said, kissing her forehead. "Try to get some rest if you can. We'll talk more tomorrow." As I crossed the hallway to Liam's room, the reality of what lay ahead began to solidify with terrifying clarity. Single parenthood, financial restructuring, legal battles, the emotional fallout that would ripple through our lives for years to come. I found Liam in his bed, blanket pulled up to his chin, eyes wide open staring at the ceiling decorated with the glow-in-the-dark stars Eric had meticulously arranged into accurate constellations. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Is Dad mad at us?" he asked immediately, his voice small and worried. The question pierced my heart. Of course that would be his interpretation, that he had somehow caused this catastrophe. "No, sweetheart, not at all. Dad loves you very much." I stroked his hair, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that have nothing to do with their children. This is one of those times. "But he's leaving. Maddie said he's leaving us for another lady." I silently cursed the thin walls of our home, the impossible task of shielding one child from information the other had already absorbed. "Dad and I are having some problems right now," I explained, the understatement of the century. "He's going to be staying somewhere else for a while." "With the lady on the phone?" His directness was disarming. "Yes," I admitted, seeing no point in fabricating a cover story he would eventually see through. Liam was quiet for a moment, processing. "Will I still see him?" "Of course you will," I assured him, though I had no idea what custody arrangements might eventually materialize from this wreckage. "You're his son. He loves you." Liam nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, though the tremble in his lower lip betrayed his continued distress. "Can you leave the hall light on tonight?" "Of course," I said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I love you, Liam, so much." "Love you too, Mom." As I left his room, leaving the door ajar and the hallway light on as promised, I was struck by the profound injustice of what Eric had done. Not just to me, a wife can recover from betrayal, can rebuild a life, but to these innocent children whose sense of security he had obliterated for his own selfish desires. Downstairs, I found Eric in his home office, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones. He looked up guiltily when he saw me in the doorway. "I have to go," he said quickly into the phone, ending the call. "Brooke?" I asked, though I knew the answer. He nodded, having the decency to look ashamed. "She's upset. Says she didn't mean to blurt it out like that. She thought you already knew." "How convenient for both of you," I replied, my voice dripping with barely contained contempt. "Our children are upstairs trying to understand why their father is abandoning them. But please, by all means, comfort your mistress during her time of distress." Eric flinched at the word mistress. "It's not like that, Vanessa. Brooke and It's a real relationship." "A real relationship built on deceit," I countered. "How romantic." I moved into the office, my office too, where I ran my freelance graphic design business, where our family finances were organized, where the evidence of our intertwined lives was scattered across filing cabinets and bookshelves. "What were you planning to tell them?" I asked, gesturing upstairs. "Before your girlfriend accelerated the timeline?" Eric ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd once found endearing. "That I was going to be staying somewhere else for a while. That adults sometimes need space to figure things out." "Coward," I whispered. "You weren't even going to tell them the truth." "They're children, Vanessa." What was I supposed to say? "Hey, kids, Daddy's in love with someone else?" The casual way he referenced his love for this other woman sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. At least it would have been honest, something you clearly struggle with. I moved to the filing cabinet, yanking open the drawer that contained our important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, property deeds, insurance policies. "What are you doing?" Eric asked, alarm evident in his voice. "Taking inventory of what you're about to destroy," I replied calmly, pulling out folders. 15 years, Eric. 15 years of building a life that you're walking away from. I want to be very clear about exactly what that means. I laid the documents on the desk between us. Our mortgage statement, showing the substantial equity we'd built in the house, the children's college funds, our retirement accounts, the joint bank statements. This is what's at stake, I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling within me. Not just your comfortable suburban existence, but their future security. Eric's eyes darted over the paperwork, reality seemingly dawning on him for the first time. I'm not abandoning my financial responsibilities. We'll work something out. Will we? I asked skeptically. And what does that look like, exactly? You supporting 2 households on your salary? Splitting assets that were meant to secure one family's future? Dividing holidays and birthdays and graduations? As I spoke, I pulled out our family photo, albums from the bookshelf, opening one to a picture of us at the beach 3 summers ago. Liam on Eric's shoulders, Maddie and I building an elaborate sand castle. All of us smiling, sunburned and happy. This is what you're walking away from, I said, pushing the album toward him. Not just me, us. This family we created, these memories, this life. For the first time since the phone call, I saw genuine conflict in Eric's eyes. Not enough to change his mind. I harbored no such illusions, but enough to suggest he hadn't fully confronted the magnitude of what he was destroying. I still want to be their father, he said quietly. That won't change. Everything will change, I corrected him. You're choosing to make sure of that. I closed the album with a decisive snap, then gathered the financial documents back into their folders. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me, the legal consultations, the division of assets, the restructuring of our entire lives. But I refused to let Eric see me buckle under it. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, he said. A statement, not a question. How considerate of you, I replied. Giving me one last night in our bed before you move in with your girlfriend. He winced at my tone but didn't argue. As he turned to leave the office, I called after him. Eric. He paused in the doorway, looking back at me. I want you to know something, I said, my voice calm and clear. I will survive this. The children will survive this. We will rebuild what you've broken, and we will thrive. But you have made a choice tonight that will ripple through all of our lives forever. I hope she's worth it. For a moment, doubt flickered across his features. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked away, leaving me alone among the artifacts of the life he no longer wanted. I sank into the office chair, surrounded by the evidence of 15 years together, tax returns and holiday cards, family photos and mortgage statements, and allowed myself a moment of pure, undiluted grief for what had been lost. Tomorrow would require strength, strategy, and determination. But tonight, just for tonight, I would mourn the death of the life I had believed in. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay in our bed, my bed now, staring at the ceiling, replaying 15 years of marriage through the distorted lens of Eric's betrayal. Each memory now required re-examination. Had he been happy then? Was that laugh genuine? When had he first looked at me and thought, not enough? Dawn broke with me still awake, my eyes burning, my mind racing. The house was quiet, too. Quiet without Eric's familiar morning routine. No shower running, no coffee brewing, no NPR murmuring from the kitchen radio. Just silence and the weight of what was to come. I reached for my phone and texted my sister, Natalie. Need to talk. Emergency. Then I forced myself out of bed. The children would be waking soon, and they needed to see me functional, resilient, in control. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. I looked older somehow, as if the revelation had aged me overnight. My phone buzzed, Natalie calling back immediately, despite the early hour. What's wrong? She asked without preamble, her voice thick with sleep but alert with concern. Eric's leaving me, I said, the words sounding surreal even as I spoke them. He's been having an affair, for a year. What? The shock in her voice mirrored what I had felt just hours before. With who? How did you find out? Her name is Brooke. She's a pharmaceutical rep at the hospital. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, suddenly dizzy. She called during dinner last night, announced to all of us that he's moving in with her. Today. Oh my God, Vanessa. Natalie's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. The children heard? Everything, I confirmed. She didn't know we didn't know. Apparently, he's been telling her for months that he was leaving us. There was a long pause on the line. That manipulative bastard, Natalie finally said, her initial shock giving way to protective anger. I'm coming over. Give me an hour. Thank you, I breathed, relieved not to face the day alone. After hanging up, I stood under the shower until the hot water ran cold, letting it wash away my tears. By the time I emerged, dressed, and made my way downstairs, I heard movement from the guest room. Eric was up. I busied myself in the kitchen, starting coffee and preparing cereal for the kids. Normalcy, or at least its appearance, felt important this morning. Eric entered a few minutes later, looking as haggard as I felt. He'd clearly slept as poorly as I had. Morning, he said awkwardly, hovering in the doorway as if unsure of his welcome in what had been his kitchen just yesterday. I didn't respond, focusing instead on setting out bowls and spoons with mechanical precision. Vanessa, he tried again. We should talk about how to handle today, with the kids. I turned to face him, my expression deliberately neutral. You're still leaving today? He hesitated, then nodded. I think it's best. A clean break. Clean for whom? I asked coldly. Certainly not for Maddie and Liam. Before he could respond, my phone chimed with a text notification. I glanced down, expecting Natalie, but saw instead a number I didn't recognize. This is Brooke. I'm sorry about last night. I truly thought you knew. Can we talk? The audacity stole my breath. I showed the screen to Eric, whose face contorted, with panic. She has your number too? I asked, a fresh wave of violation washing over me. I didn't give it to her, he said quickly. I swear. A horrible thought struck me. My God, Eric, has she been in our house? While we were gone? His expression told me everything. Just once, he admitted, about 2 months ago. You were at that graphic design conference in Chicago with the kids visiting your parents. The room tilted dangerously. This woman had been in my home, walked through my rooms, perhaps even sat on my furniture, all while I was obliviously pursuing my career and caring for our children. The invasion felt physically sickening. Did you sleep with her in our bed? I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. No. Eric looked genuinely horrified. God, no. She wanted to see where I lived. She was curious. Curious, I repeated flatly. About the life you were planning to abandon. Eric ran his hands through his hair. It wasn't like that. She wanted to understand my world. Your world, I echoed. The one you built with me. The one you're destroying today. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I should start packing. Yes, I agreed coldly. You should. As he retreated upstairs, I stared at Brooke's message, considering how to respond. The temptation to unleash my fury was almost overwhelming. But what would that accomplish? Instead, I blocked the number without replying. She didn't deserve access to me or my emotions. The front door opened then, and Natalie swept in, her energy filling the kitchen like a burst of oxygen. At 43, 2 years my senior, she had always been my fiercest protector, from playground bullies to my first heartbreak. Where is he? She demanded, dropping her purse on the counter and enveloping me in a tight hug. Upstairs, packing. My voice broke on the last word, and Natalie's arms tightened around me. Let me go up there and tell him exactly what I think of him, she growled. I shook my head. The kids will be up soon. I don't want them to see more conflict. Natalie reluctantly conceded, then guided me to sit at the kitchen table while she, took over coffee making. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the details, Brooke's call, Eric's admission of his year-long affair, his plans to leave, Natalie's expression darkened with each revelation. When I mentioned Brooke had been in our house, she slammed her mug down so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. "That's breaking and entering," she fumed. "He let her in," I corrected wearily. "It's still a violation," Natalie insisted. "Vanessa, have you checked your financial accounts? Your credit cards? Your joint savings?" I blinked, taken aback by the question. "No, why would I?" "Because men who lead double lives often finance them," she cut in grimly. I learned that from Caroline's divorce last year. Her husband had been siphoning money for months before he left. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. I hadn't even considered that possibility. Opening my laptop, I logged into our online banking portal, Natalie looking over my shoulder. Our checking account showed normal activity, bills paid, groceries purchased, the usual expenses of family life. But when I clicked on our joint savings account, intended for emergencies and major home repairs, the balance stopped me cold. "That can't be right," I whispered. Where there should have been just over $42,000, money we'd been diligently saving for years, the account showed a balance of $17,893. 24. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the transaction history. There. It was a series of withdrawals over the past 6 months, ranging from $1,500 to $4,000, totaling nearly $25,000. "Son of a bitch," Natalie breathed. "He's been funding his escape." I stared at the screen, numb with shock. This wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. This was financial sabotage. Eric had been systematically draining our savings while maintaining the facade of our normal. "Huh, Mom?" Maddie's voice came from the doorway. I quickly closed the laptop, forcing a smile. "Morning, sweetheart." Aunt Natalie came to visit. Maddie wasn't fooled. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her expression too mature for her 12 years. "Is Dad still leaving today?" Before I could answer, Eric appeared behind her, carrying a large suitcase. "I'm going to load up the car," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. Natalie's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Kids, why don't you go have some cereal in the den and watch TV for a bit? The grown-ups need to talk." Maddie looked like she might protest, but then nodded, taking Liam's hand and leading him away. Once they were out of earshot, Natalie rounded on Eric. "You stole from your family," she stated, her voice vibrating with controlled fury. Eric froze, his expression confirming his guilt before he could formulate a denial. "What are you talking about?" "The savings account," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. $25,000, Eric. What did you do with it?" He set the suitcase down slowly. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because it looks like you've been planning this departure for months, financing it with money we saved together." Eric's eyes darted between Natalie and me, calculating. "I set it aside," he finally admitted. "For expenses during the transition, lawyer fees, security deposit on a new place." I was going to tell you. "When?" Natalie interjected. "After you emptied the account entirely?" "This isn't your business, Nat," Eric snapped. "My sister and her children are my business," she fired back. "Especially when someone is stealing their financial security." I stood up slowly, a strange calm settling over me. "Put the money back, Eric. All of it. Today." "Vanessa, be reasonable. I don't care what you need," I interrupted, my voice glacial. "That money belongs to this family, the family you're abandoning. You will transfer it back before you leave this house, or I will call the police and report financial fraud." Eric blanched. "You wouldn't do that." "Try me," I challenged, meeting his gaze without flinching. The children's college funds better be untouched, too. I'll be checking those next. Something in my expression must have convinced him. After a tense moment, he nodded stiffly. Fine, I'll make the transfer. As he reached for his phone, I felt a shift inside me. A hardening, a crystallization of resolve. This was no longer just about a husband leaving his wife. This was about a calculated betrayal that extended beyond the emotional into the practical foundations of our life. Eric hadn't just broken my heart. He had deliberately undermined our family's security. In that moment, watching him reluctantly transfer back funds he had secretly diverted, I knew with absolute clarity that this would not be the amicable, dignified separation he clearly envisioned. This would be a reckoning. And I was just beginning to understand how much there was to reckon with. After confirming that Eric had transferred the money back to our joint savings account, I felt a curious sense of detachment wash over me. The initial shock had given way to something colder, more calculated. I watched him moving around the house, gathering his possessions, and realized I was observing him as if he were a stranger, which, in many ways, he now was. I need to get the kids ready for school, I announced, my voice steady. Natalie, can you stay and make sure everything here is taken care of? My sister nodded, understanding my unspoken request to monitor Eric's departure. Of course. I took the day off. I'm not going anywhere. Eric looked between us, frowning. The kids shouldn't go to school today, not with everything that's happening. What's happening is their father is leaving, I replied evenly. That's no reason to disrupt their education as well as their home life. Vanessa, be reasonable. Don't, I cut him off, my tone sharp enough to make him flinch. Don't tell me what's reasonable when you've been lying to all of us for a year. Before he could respond, I turned and headed upstairs to find the children. Maddie was in her room, already dressed in jeans and a hoodie, her backpack packed. Beside her, always the organized one, even in crisis. We're still going to school? She asked, her expression unreadable. Yes, I confirmed. I think routine is important right now. She nodded slowly. So Dad can leave while we're gone. Is that the plan? Sometimes I forgot how perceptive she was, how little got past her. Partly, I admitted, but also because I need some time to think, and I can do that better knowing you're safe at school, doing normal things. Nothing feels normal anymore, Mom. I sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand. I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry about that. But we're going to get through this. I promise. He's really moving in with that woman? Today? The hurt in her voice made my chest ache. That's what he says, I replied, careful not to let my own bitterness seep into my tone. But I want you to know something important. No matter what happens with your dad and me, we both love you and Liam. That hasn't changed, and it won't change. Maddie's eyes filled with tears. But everything else is changing. I couldn't argue with that. Instead, I hugged her close, letting her cry against my shoulder. Change can be scary, I whispered into her hair. But we're strong, Maddie. Stronger than you know. We'll figure this out together. After a moment, she pulled away, wiping her eyes. I'll go check on Liam, make sure he's getting ready. I watched her go, marveling at her resilience. Then I moved to the master bathroom and stared at my reflection again. The woman looking back at me seemed different from yesterday. Harder, more focused. Good. I would need that strength in the days to come. 15 minutes later, we were all downstairs. Eric stood awkwardly by the door as the children ate breakfast, Natalie supervising from the kitchen island, her expression making it clear she was guarding against any further financial maneuvers. I should say goodbye to the kids, Eric said quietly when I approached. I nodded. Yes, you should. But Eric... I lowered my voice so only he could hear. If you make promises you don't intend to keep, if you hurt them more than you already have, there will be consequences. His eyes widened slightly at my tone. They're my children too, Vanessa. Then start acting like a father, I replied coldly. A father doesn't abandon his family for a woman he's known less than a year. Eric looked like he might argue, but then seemed to think better of it. He moved to the kitchen table, crouching between Maddie and Liam's chairs. Hey guys, he began, his voice unnaturally cheerful. I know things are a bit confusing right now. Maddie stared stonily at her cereal. Liam looked up with wide, uncertain eyes. I'm going to be staying somewhere else for a while, Eric continued, but I'll still see you all the time. We can do fun things together on weekends and I'll come to all your school events. With her? Maddie asked suddenly, looking up to fix her father with an accusing stare. Eric faltered. Well, sometimes maybe. Brooke is. She's going to be part of my life now, and I hope someday you'll get to know her. I don't want to, Maddie interrupted flatly. I don't want to know the person who broke up our family. Eric glanced at me, as if expecting me to intervene, to soften Maddie's stance. I remained silent. These were her feelings, valid and raw. I wouldn't police them to make him more comfortable. Maddie, it's more complicated than that, Eric tried again. Sometimes adults. Their feelings change. That doesn't mean I don't love you and Liam with all my heart. If you loved us, you wouldn't leave, Liam said quietly, his lower lip trembling. The simplicity of the statement hit like a physical blow. Eric looked stricken, clearly unprepared for such direct confrontation from his 9-year-old son. Buddy, that's not true, he protested. I do love you, so much, and we'll still have lots of time together. When? Liam demanded. After school? On weekends? When we get sick? Will you still come to my baseball games? Of course I will, Eric assured him. I wouldn't miss them. You missed the last two, Liam pointed out, his expression breaking my heart with its mixture of hurt and accusation. You said you had to work late. The realization struck us, both simultaneously. Those late nights at the hospital had likely been spent with Brooke. Eric had already been choosing her over his children's activities. I'll be there for the next one, Eric promised, his voice strained. I swear. Time for school, I interjected, unable to watch this painful exchange continue. Go brush your teeth and grab your backpacks. The children slid from their chairs, Maddie taking Liam's hand as they headed upstairs. Once they were out of earshot, I turned to Eric. You've been missing their events for her, I stated, not a question but an indictment. Eric had the grace to look ashamed. Not all of them, just sometimes. Those moments matter, Eric. They're children. They notice who shows up for them and who doesn't. I know that, he snapped, defensive now. I don't need parenting advice from you. Clearly you need it from someone, Natalie interjected from her position at the island. Since you're failing spectacularly at the moment. Eric glared at her. Natalie, with all due respect. You haven't earned any respect, she cut in. Not after what you've done. I raised a hand, stopping their brewing argument. Not now. Not with the kids upstairs. I turned to Eric. When will you be back for the rest of your things? He seemed taken aback by the practical question. I'm not sure. Maybe this weekend? Fine. Text me first. I'd prefer the children not be here. Vanessa. He started, then stopped, seemingly unsure what to say. I know this isn't how either of us wanted things to end. A laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. Don't pretend to know what I want. Eric. You forfeited that right when you started sleeping with a pharmaceutical rep while telling me you were working late. His face flushed with anger or embarrassment. I couldn't tell which and didn't care. This isn't productive. No, I agreed coldly. Neither was our marriage, apparently. The sound of footsteps on the stairs signaled the children's return. Eric straightened, composing his expression into something resembling fatherly concern. He hugged each child, making more promises about calls and visits that I silently catalogued, knowing I would hold him to every single one. As I walked them to the car for the drive to school, I could feel Eric watching from the doorway. Neither child looked back at him. The school drop-off was a blur. I maintained a facade of normalcy, smiling and waving to teachers, exchanging pleasantries with other parents. No one needed to know that my life had imploded less than 12 hours ago. The children seemed to take their cue from me, going through the motions of their morning routine with admirable composure. Once they had disappeared into their respective buildings, I sat in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. For a brief moment, I considered driving to the hospital, finding this Brooke person, confronting her face to face. The fantasy was vivid. The shocked expressions of Eric's colleagues, the public humiliation of the woman who had helped destroy my family. But what would that accomplish beyond momentary satisfaction? It would make me look unstable, desperate. It would turn me into a spectacle, a cautionary tale whispered about in hospital corridors. No. That wasn't the way forward. I started the car and drove, not home where Eric might still be packing, but to the coffee shop near my favorite park. Once there, I ordered a large coffee, found a quiet corner table, and pulled out a notebook and pen from my purse. Think, Vanessa, I murmured to myself. Don't react. Plan. On the blank page, I began to list everything I knew. Eric has been having an affair with Brooke for approximately 1 year. He has been planning to leave for at least 4 months. He withdrew $25,000 from our joint savings without my knowledge. He has allowed Brooke into our home at least once. He has been missing children's events to spend time with her. Then I made a second list of what I needed to know. What is our exact financial situation? What are my legal rights regarding the house, custody, assets? How much has Eric told Brooke about our personal lives? Are there other accounts or assets I don't know about? And finally, a third list of immediate actions. Contact a divorce attorney. Secure copies of all financial records. Change passwords on personal accounts. Establish clear boundaries for Eric's contact with the children. Find a therapist for the children and myself. Looking at the lists, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. This was manageable. Difficult, painful, but manageable. By breaking down the overwhelming situation into concrete problems with specific solutions, I had given myself a roadmap through the chaos. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. He's gone. Took about 6 suitcases and his computer. I'm still here. You okay? I typed back. On my way home. Made a plan. As I drove back to the house, my house now, I supposed, I realized that the crushing pain I had felt last night had transformed into something different. Not gone, certainly, but channeled into a clear-eyed determination. Eric had made his choice, calculating and deliberate. Now I would make mine, with equal deliberation but greater integrity. He might have broken our family, but he would not break me. When I returned home, Natalie had transformed the kitchen into a command center. Spread across the island were stacks of papers she'd pulled from our home office, bank statements, insurance policies, property records, organized with a precision that reflected her accountant's mind. I hope you don't mind, she said, looking up as I entered. I thought we should get a clear picture of your financial situation. The weight of her words, your financial situation, not our financial situation, landed with unexpected force. So much of my adult life had been framed as part of a couple, a partnership. Now I was a singular entity again, solely responsible for navigating this new reality. Thank you, I said, setting down my purse and joining her at the island. This is exactly what I need. Natalie squeezed my shoulder. How are you holding up? Surprisingly steady, I admitted. I think I'm still in shock, but it's Productive shock? Is that a thing? For someone as pragmatic as you, absolutely. She pushed a legal pad toward me. I've made some notes based on what I've found. So far. The good news is that Eric seems to have been telling the truth about the savings account. That's the only major withdrawal I can see. Your retirement accounts appear untouched, as do the kids' college funds. Relief flooded through me. That was something, at least. But, Natalie continued, I'm concerned about a few credit card statements. Look at this one. She pointed to a series of charges from hotels. Not in our city, but in towns within a 2-hour drive. These line up with some of those conferences Eric claimed to be attending. The charges are all for 2-night stays. My stomach twisted. So, he was taking her on weekend getaways while telling me he was at medical administration conferences. Natalie nodded grimly. And charging it to your joint credit card. You've been helping finance his affair. The violation was layered, each revelation peeling back another level of betrayal. Not only had he been unfaithful, but he'd used our shared resources to facilitate it. Resources that I had contributed to through my freelance design work. The mortgage is in both your names, Natalie continued, moving to another stack of papers. And based on these property tax records, you've built up about $180,000 in equity since you bought the place. In a divorce, that would typically be split equally. The word divorce hung in the air, concrete and inevitable. Until that moment, I hadn't consciously thought of the legal term for what was happening, but of course, that's where this was heading. My marriage was over. I needed to formalize its dissolution. I need a lawyer, I said, voicing the thought. Aloud. Already on it, Natalie replied. I called Rachel. Rachel Williams was a friend from Natalie's college days who had become one of the city's most respected divorce attorneys. Known for her ruthless efficiency, she specialized in cases involving infidelity and financial misconduct. She can see you tomorrow morning at 9, Natalie added. I hope that's okay. I thought moving quickly was important, especially given everything. It's perfect, I said gratefully. Thank you for thinking of that. Of course. Natalie's expression softened. You need a team, Vanessa. No one should go through this alone. Her words reminded me of something else I'd decided in the coffee shop. I'm going to call Patricia, too. Patricia Miller had been my closest friend since we met in a prenatal yoga class, while both pregnant with our first children. She was loyal, discreet, and unfailingly honest, qualities I desperately needed right now. Good idea, Natalie agreed. The more support, the better. And she hesitated slightly. What about Mom and Dad? Should we tell them? I winced at the thought. Our parents, married for 47 years, had always adored Eric. They would be devastated by this news, and their disappointment would add another layer of emotional complexity I wasn't sure I could handle yet. Not yet, I decided. Let me get through the initial legal consultation first. Figure out what I'm dealing with. Then I'll call them. Natalie nodded, understanding. Your call, but don't wait too long. News like this has a way of traveling. I pulled out my phone and texted Patricia. Need to talk ASAP. Something's happened. Can you come by tonight after the kids are in bed? Her response was immediate. Of course. Everything okay? I stared at her question, unsure how to answer. Nothing was okay, and yet I was functioning, breathing, planning. No, I finally replied. But I will be. 8:30? I'll be there, came the quick response. With that arranged, I turned back to the financial documents, focusing my attention on understanding exactly what resources I had at my disposal. The house was our most significant asset, followed by retirement accounts and the children's college funds. My freelance graphic design business had been growing steadily over the past few years, but still provided only supplemental income to Eric's hospital administrator salary. I need to increase my client base. I mused, thinking aloud. If I'm going to support the kids on my own. One step at a time, Natalie cautioned. First, let's secure what you already have. Rachel will help with that part. We spent the next hour organizing documents, making copies of important papers, and creating a comprehensive inventory of assets. By the time we finished, it was nearly time to pick up the children from school. I'm coming with you, Natalie announced when I grabbed my car keys. You don't have to do that, I protested. I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, those kids could use a little extra love today. I couldn't argue with that. The school pickup went as smoothly as could be expected under the circumstances. Both children were subdued but composed. Liam brightened considerably when he saw Natalie in the car, immediately launching into a story about the classroom guinea pig that had escaped during science period. Aunt Natalie, are you staying for dinner? He asked as we drove home. If that's okay with you guys, she replied, glancing at me for confirmation. More than okay, I assured her. In fact, Aunt Natalie might be staying with us for a few days. Would you like that? Liam nodded enthusiastically. Maddie in the front passenger seat gave me a knowing look. Because of Dad leaving, she stated flatly. I met her gaze steadily. Yes. I thought it would be nice to have her around while we adjust to the changes. Maddie considered this, then nodded. Good. I'm glad you won't be alone. Her maturity both impressed and concerned me. 12 was too young to be worrying about a parent's emotional well-being. I'm not alone, I said gently. I have you and Liam. That's different, she replied with that disconcerting wisdom. We're kids. You need grown-up support. From the back seat, Natalie caught my eye in the rearview mirror, her expression saying what we were both thinking. Maddie was processing this with remarkable insight, but would need careful attention in the days ahead. Back home, we fell into a routine that felt almost normal. Homework at the kitchen table, dinner preparation, casual conversation about school events and upcoming projects. If not for the conspicuous absence of Eric and the undercurrent of tension, it might have been any ordinary afternoon. After dinner, as the children retreated to their rooms for pre-bedtime activities, I found myself standing in the master bedroom, staring at Eric's side of the closet. Though he had taken several suitcases worth of clothing, much remained, suits, hanging neatly, dress shoes lined up on the rack, casual wear folded in drawers. The physical remnants of his presence felt like a taunt. Without conscious thought, I began pulling items from hangers, expensive suits he'd bought for hospital fundraisers, designer shirts I'd gifted him for birthdays and Christmases. Soon a pile formed on the bed, growing larger as I methodically emptied his side of the closet. What are you doing? Natalie asked from the doorway, watching with raised eyebrows. Reclaiming my space, I replied, not breaking rhythm as I pulled another suit from its hanger. If he wants to live with Brooke, he can keep his possessions with Brooke. Natalie stepped into the room, surveying the heap of clothing. Want some boxes? I saw some in the garage from that furniture delivery last month. Perfect. Together, we worked silently, folding and packing Eric's remaining clothes, toiletries, books, and personal effects. There was something therapeutic about the process. Each item removed felt like severing another tie that bound me to him. What about his drawer in the nightstand? Natalie asked, pointing to his side of the bed. I opened it cautiously, half expecting to find more evidence of betrayal. Instead, I found the mundane artifacts of a shared life: reading glasses, a half-empty tube of hand cream, a dog-eared novel, charging cables. As I swept the contents into a box, a small leather-bound book caught my eye. I pulled it out, recognizing it as the pocket planner Eric carried to keep track of meetings and appointments. Should I look? I asked Natalie, turning the planner over in my hands. She shrugged. It might contain useful information for your meeting with Rachel tomorrow. Decision made, I opened it, flipping through the pages of the current month. Most entries were benign: board meetings, staff evaluations, doctor's appointments for the children. But as I turned to previous months, patterns emerged. Regular. Blocks of time labeled simply B appeared every few days, often during hours he had told me he was working late or attending committee meetings. B for Brooke, Natalie said, reading over my shoulder. Not exactly a master of deception, is he? He didn't need to be, I replied bitterly. I trusted him completely. As I turned back further through the planner, I stumbled upon an entry from January that made me freeze. Tiffany, ring. Oh my God, I whispered, showing Natalie. Her eyes widened. He bought her jewelry? Not just jewelry, a ring. The implication was clear and devastating. He's been planning to marry her. The discovery hit with physical force, stealing my breath. One thing to have an affair, to decide to leave your family. Another entirely to be planning a new marriage, while still entrenched in the current one. The level of calculated deception was staggering. Vanessa, Natalie began carefully, this changes things. If he's been planning to remarry, there may be other preparations we haven't found yet. Joint accounts, property. The doorbell rang, interrupting her speculation. I glanced at my watch. 8:30. Patricia had arrived. I need to get that, I said, setting the planner aside. But I'm keeping this as evidence. Natalie nodded. Go. I'll finish up here and check on the kids. As I descended the stairs, I felt a peculiar lightness. Each revelation, though painful, clarified my path forward. The discovery of Eric's intentions regarding Brooke had somehow crystallized my own resolve. I was no longer merely responding to a crisis. I was actively charting a course through it. Patricia stood on the porch, a tote bag slung over her shoulder, that I knew contained wine and chocolate, her standard emergency kit for difficult conversations. Her expression was worried but determined. What's happened? She asked immediately. I opened the door wider, inviting her in. Eric's been having an affair for a year. He's moved out. I need your help figuring out what comes next. Patricia's reaction to my revelation was exactly what I needed. A perfect blend of outrage on my behalf and pragmatic focus on next steps. After the initial shock wore off, she pulled a legal pad from her tote bag, bypassing the wine for the moment. Tell me everything, she instructed, pen poised. And I mean everything, Vanessa. Details matter. For the next hour, while Natalie supervised the children's bedtime routine upstairs, I recounted the events of the past 24 hours. Brooke's call, Eric's admissions, the financial discoveries, and the most recent revelation about the ring purchase. Patricia took meticulous notes, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. As a paralegal at a corporate law firm, she had a knack for identifying relevant facts and potential legal issues. This planner entry about the ring, she said, tapping her pen against the pad. What exactly did it say again? I retrieved the small leather-bound book from the coffee table where I'd left it. Just Tiffany, ring on January 18th. Patricia held out her hand. May I? I passed her the planner, and she carefully examined the entry, then flipped through surrounding pages. There's something else here, she said, pointing to an entry. A week later. Look, B, lease discussion? I leaned closer. She was right. The entry was small, squeezed in beside a hospital board meeting, but unmistakable. They were discussing a lease in January, I murmured, months before he claimed they were planning to move in together. Patricia continued paging through the planner, her expression growing increasingly concerned. Vanessa, there's a pattern here. Look at these entries. She pointed to several notations scattered throughout February and March. Condo tour, mortgage pre-approval, B, furniture shopping. He's been planning to buy property with her, I said, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. Not just move into her place. They're purchasing something together. Patricia nodded grimly. which means there could be financial entanglements we haven't uncovered yet. Pre-approval means he's provided financial documents to a lender, possibly made commitments. My mind raced with implications. If Eric had been approved for a mortgage with Brooke, what financial information had he disclosed? What assets had he committed to this purchase? And most importantly, had he already signed any binding agreements that could affect our marital assets? I need to find out more, I said, standing abruptly. Tomorrow at my meeting with Rachel, but also now, there might be emails, documents. His computer, Natalie suggested, coming down the stairs. The kids are asleep. What did I miss? Patricia quickly filled her in on our discovery while I considered Natalie's suggestion. Eric had taken his laptop when he left, but he often worked from our desktop computer in the home office, especially when reviewing financial documents that were easier to see on the larger monitor. The desktop might have some information, I agreed, already moving toward the office. He sometimes stays logged into accounts. The computer was password protected, but Eric and I had shared passwords for years, a practice born of convenience and trust. I entered his standard password, a combination of our wedding date and Maddie's birth year, and was immediately granted access. Start with the email, Patricia advised, looking over my shoulder. Check for correspondence with real estate agents, mortgage brokers, or Brooke herself. Eric's email account opened without requiring additional authentication, another small betrayal that now worked in my favor. His inbox was meticulously organized into folders, a reflection of his administrative mindset. I quickly scanned for anything relevant. There, Natalie pointed to a folder labeled Housing. Inside were dozens of emails dating back to January, correspondence with a real estate agent named Diana Mercer, mortgage pre-approval documents from First National Bank, and several exchanges with Brooke about property preferences. He's been house hunting with her since January, I said, scrolling through the emails. Look at this one. They've made an offer on a condo downtown. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. 3 bedrooms? Patricia raised an eyebrow. That's more space than 2 people need. A cold realization settled in my stomach. Unless they're planning for more than 2 people. Natalie's expression darkened. You think they want the kids to stay with them? Or they're planning to have children of their own, I said, the possibility hitting me with unexpected force. Eric was 41, still young enough to start another family if he wanted to. I clicked on a recent email from the real estate agent, confirming that their offer on the condo had been accepted. The closing date was set for June 15th, just 6 weeks away. He's buying property while still legally married to you, Patricia noted. That's significant from a legal standpoint. In this state, any property acquired during marriage is generally considered marital property, regardless of whose name is on the deed. So, even if he buys this condo with Brooke, I might have a claim on it? I asked, trying to understand the implications. Potentially, Patricia nodded. It depends on several factors, including the source of the funds. But this is definitely something Rachel needs to know about tomorrow. I continued searching through the email folder, discovering a draft purchase agreement that Eric had apparently downloaded but not yet signed. Opening the PDF revealed more disturbing details. The purchase price was $685,000, with a down payment of $137,000. That's a substantial down payment, Natalie observed. Where is he getting that kind of money? We all knew the answer before. I even checked. Eric's retirement account, an investment portfolio he'd been building for years alongside his hospital pension, had recently been valued at just over $450,000. The only way he could make a down payment that size would be by withdrawing from that account. He's planning to raid his retirement, I said, the pieces falling into place. That's why he didn't touch it when he was taking money from the savings account. He's saving it for this purchase. Early withdrawal would trigger penalties and taxes, Natalie pointed out, her accountant's mind automatically calculating the financial impact. He'd lose at least 30% to taxes and penalties. It's a financially reckless move. Reckless seems to be his current operating mode, I replied bitterly. I continued exploring the computer, checking browser history and downloaded files. In a folder labeled Personal, I found more evidence of Eric's plans, a spreadsheet tracking joint expenses with Brooke, including her contributions to what appeared to be their shared financial goals. Look at this, I said, pointing to a column labeled B's contribution. The entries showed regular transfers from Brooke to an account number I didn't recognize. She's been sending him money for months. Patricia leaned closer. That's not a joint account you share with him, is it? No. Our accounts all start with different numbers. So he's opened a separate account to receive money from her, Patricia concluded. Again, something Rachel needs to know about. The more we uncovered, the more evident it became that Eric's betrayal extended far beyond the emotional realm into calculated financial deception. He had been systematically establishing a parallel financial life, hidden from me but intricately connected to our marital resources. We should document all of this, Natalie suggested, already reaching for her phone to take pictures of the screen. Email yourself copies of anything important. For the next hour, we methodically combed through Eric's digital footprint on the shared computer, downloading emails, taking screenshots of bank account information, saving copies of the purchase agreement and mortgage pre-approval documents. Every discovery added another layer to the picture of Eric's duplicity. Beyond the financial revelations, there were personal ones that cut just as deeply. In his photo library, I found dozens of pictures of Eric and Brooke together, at restaurants, on weekend trips, even at what appeared to be her family's holiday gathering. The timestamps confirmed they dated back to last spring, almost exactly, when he claimed their relationship had begun. He took her to meet his parents, I said numbly, opening a photo from March that showed Eric and Brooke with his mother and father at their lakeside cottage. He told me he was going alone to help them open the place for the season. The betrayal felt fresh again, raw and personal. My in-laws of 15 years, people who had sent me birthday cards and Christmas gifts, who had cradled my newborn children, had met the woman who was destroying their son's marriage and said nothing to me. Did they know? Patricia asked gently, that he was still married? They must have, I replied, the hurt evident in my voice. Unless he lied to them, too. The possibility that Eric had deceived his own parents seemed both unlikely and entirely possible given everything else we'd discovered. The man who had methodically constructed this double life had proven himself capable of extraordinary deception. As midnight approached, exhaustion began to set in. We had compiled a substantial dossier of evidence, financial records, emails, photographs, calendar entries, all documenting Eric's year-long campaign to establish a new life while maintaining the facade of our marriage. I think we've done enough for tonight, Patricia said, noticing my fatigue. You need rest before your meeting with Rachel tomorrow. She was right. My mind was beginning to fog with the emotional and intellectual exertion of the past hours. But there was one more place I needed to check before I could stop for the night. I want to look at his text messages, I said, pulling out my phone. While we didn't share devices, our family plan included a feature that backed up text messages to our cloud account, another convenience that now served a different purpose. Logging into the account, I navigated to Eric's message history. At a first glance, there was nothing unusual. Conversations with colleagues, logistical exchanges with me about the children, group chats with friends. But when I searched specifically for Brooke's number, which I'd identified from the blocked call on my phone, hundreds of messages appeared. He deleted these from his phone, I realized, but forgot they would still be in the cloud backup. The messages painted a vivid picture of their relationship's evolution, from flirtatious workplace interactions to explicit exchanges about their future together. What struck me most, however, were the messages about me. She's completely clueless. Eric had written in one exchange from October, "Thinks I'm working late again. If only she knew what I was really doing." The mockery in his tone was unmistakable, the cruel satisfaction of deceiving someone who trusted him completely. "That bastard," Natalie whispered, reading over my shoulder. He was enjoying the deception. I couldn't deny the evidence before me. Eric hadn't just fallen in love with someone else and struggled with how to end our marriage. He had reveled in the duplicity, finding pleasure in maintaining the lies that were slowly destroying our family's foundation. "I think I've seen enough," I said quietly, setting the phone down. The depth of his betrayal was becoming an abyss I couldn't continue to explore tonight. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. "You've done good work, Vanessa. Really good work. Rachel will have everything she needs to protect you and the kids." As they helped me organize the evidence we'd gathered into a folder for tomorrow's meeting, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment amid the pain. In just 24 hours, I had moved from shocked victim to informed strategist. I understood what I was facing now, not just the end of my marriage, but a calculated attempt to divert resources from my children's future to Eric's new life. That clarity brought a steely resolve. Eric might have chosen deception, but I would choose transparency. He had operated in shadows. I would stand in the light. Most importantly, he had prioritized his desires over our children's well-being, a miscalculation he would soon regret. As I finally fell into bed that night, exhausted but focused, I knew that tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new phase in this unwanted journey. Armed with information and supported by loyal allies, I would meet with Rachel and begin the formal process of untangling my life from Eric's web of lies. The game he didn't know he was playing was about to change dramatically. And I intended to win. The law offices of Williams, Draper & Associates occupied the 20th floor of a sleek downtown building with views of the city skyline. As I stepped off the elevator, clutching my folder of evidence, I felt simultaneously underprepared and oddly empowered. Less than 48 hours had passed since Brooke's phone call had shattered my reality. Yet here I was, taking concrete steps to rebuild from the ruins. Rachel Williams greeted me in the reception area herself, a courtesy I suspected had more to do with her friendship with Natalie than standard protocol. Tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, she projected exactly the blend of authority and composure I needed in that moment. "Vanessa," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm so sorry about the circumstances, but I'm glad you reached out quickly. Come to my office." Her corner suite was elegant, but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a conference table where she gestured for me to sit, rather than across from her at her imposing desk. It was a subtle touch that immediately put me at ease. We would be partners in this process, not supplicant in authority. "Natalie mentioned some of the basics," Rachel began once I was settled. "But I'd like to hear everything directly from you. Start from the beginning. And don't worry about whether something seems legally relevant. I'll sort that out." For the next 45 minutes, I methodically recounted the events since Brooke's call, including all the information we had gathered from Eric's planner, emails, and financial records. Rachel took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly listening with focused attention. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and professional assessment. "First of all, I want to acknowledge how difficult this must be. The abrupt discovery of infidelity is traumatic under any circumstances, but the calculated nature of Eric's deception adds another dimension entirely." I nodded, appreciating her validation without wanting to dwell on it. "What I need to know is where I stand legally. What can I do to protect myself and my children?" Rachel smiled slightly. "That's exactly the right question. And fortunately, based on what you've told me and the evidence you've gathered, you're in a stronger position than many clients who walk through my door." She opened a sleek laptop and began typing notes as she outlined our options. "In this state, we have no-fault divorce as the standard. But there are circumstances where fault can be relevant to financial settlements and custody arrangements. Eric's financial deception, particularly the removal of funds from joint accounts, and the apparent attempt to purchase property during the marriage without your knowledge, could potentially impact how assets are divided. "What about the children?" I asked, my primary concern always returning to Maddie and Liam. He mentioned wanting them to visit his new place, presumably with Brooke there. Rachel's expression grew more serious. "Custody and visitation will be a separate but related issue. Courts generally favor arrangements that maintain relationships with both parents, but they also consider factors like stability and the children's best interests. The sudden disruption Eric has caused could be relevant, as could any evidence that his relationship with Brooke might negatively impact the children." She turned her laptop toward me, showing a document she had begun outlining. "Here's how I suggest we proceed. First, we need to file a petition for divorce that clearly establishes your position. Given what you've discovered about the real estate purchase, I recommend we also file for an emergency injunction to prevent Eric from making major financial moves that could affect marital assets." The clinical terminology made everything feel more real, but also more manageable. This wasn't just emotional chaos, it was a legal process with established steps and protocols. "Second," Rachel continued, "we should request a detailed financial disclosure from Eric. Even though you've uncovered significant information already, a formal disclosure under oath will ensure we have a complete picture. If he fails to disclose assets or accounts we know exist, it strengthens our position considerably." I nodded, absorbing her recommendations. "And custody?" "We'll file for temporary custody orders that maintain the children's primary residence with you in the family home. Given that Eric has already moved out and established residence elsewhere, this approach has a strong chance of success. We can propose a visitation schedule that allows the children regular contact with their father, while minimizing disruption to their routines." She paused, studying my expression. "How do you personally feel about Eric's continued involvement with the children?" Setting aside legal strategies for a moment. The question caught me off guard. Despite everything, I hadn't considered trying to limit Eric's relationship with Maddie and Liam. "They need their father," I said finally. "I'm angry with him, but I wouldn't use the children as weapons. That said, I'm concerned about Brooke's role in their lives. They've just learned their family is being torn apart because of her relationship with their father. Being forced to spend time with her immediately seems traumatic." Rachel nodded approvingly. "That's a balanced perspective that courts appreciate. We can request that initial visitation take place without Brooke present, giving the children time to adjust to the new circumstances. Judges often grant such provisions, at least temporarily." She turned back to her laptop, continuing to outline our strategy. "In addition to these immediate steps, we need to think about longer-term financial security. Based on what you've told me about your career and income disparity with Eric, we should pursue spousal support in addition to child support. The length of your marriage and your role supporting his career while caring for the children strengthen that claim considerably." For the next hour, we delved into the specifics of divorce proceedings, timelines, documentation requirements, potential challenges Eric might raise, and counter strategies. Rachel was thorough but efficient, translating complex legal concepts into actionable steps I could understand. "There's one more thing we should discuss," she said as our consultation neared its end. "The condo purchase Eric is pursuing with Brooke. The timing presents both a challenge and an opportunity." I leaned forward, intrigued. "How so?" "The purchase agreement isn't signed yet, but the closing date is set for June 15th. That's likely before any divorce proceedings would be finalized, which means any property acquired is technically still marital property." She tapped her pen thoughtfully against the table. "If Eric proceeds with the purchase, you potentially have a claim on that asset. If he backs out, he may forfeit earnest money or face other penalties that would affect the marital estate." The strategic implications were fascinating but complex. So, what do you recommend? We don't tip our hand immediately, Rachel replied with the hint of a smile. We file for divorce and the emergency injunction regarding finances, but we don't specifically mention the condo purchase in our initial filing. We let Eric make his next move, then respond accordingly. It felt like a chess match, strategic and calculating, exactly the approach needed to counter Eric's own calculated deception. What happens next? I asked, as Rachel closed her laptop. Our consultation clearly winding down. My team will prepare the necessary paperwork immediately. We can have everything ready for your review by tomorrow morning. Once you approve, we'll file with the court and have Eric served with the divorce petition and financial injunction. She checked her calendar. Realistically, he could be served by Friday. The timeline was breathtaking in its efficiency. After 15 years of marriage, the legal dismantling would begin in less than a week. Is that too aggressive? I wondered aloud. Should we try mediation first? Rachel's expression turned serious. Vanessa, based on what you've shared, Eric has been methodically planning his exit for nearly a year, taking steps to secure his financial future, potentially at the expense of yours and your children's. He's withdrawn joint funds without your knowledge, hidden his relationship with his parents, and is actively pursuing real estate with another woman while still legally married to you. This isn't a situation where mediation is likely to protect your interests. Put like that, the path forward seemed clear. You're right. Let's proceed. As I gathered my belongings to leave, Rachel handed me a sleek business card. This has my direct line and personal cell number. Don't hesitate to call with any questions or concerns, day or night. And Vanessa, she waited until I met her gaze. You're handling this with remarkable strength and clarity. Many clients in your position are too overwhelmed to think strategically. The fact that you're already focused on practical steps, rather than just emotional reactions, gives us a significant advantage. Her words bolstered my confidence as I left the office, heading to my next appointment. A consultation with Dr. Helena Fraser, a child psychologist Natalie had recommended for Maddie and Liam. While Rachel would handle the legal dismantling of my marriage, I needed expert guidance on helping my children process the emotional fallout. Dr. Fraser's office presented a dramatic contrast to the sleek law firm. Warm colors, comfortable furnishings, and walls adorned with children's artwork. The psychologist herself, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, immediately made me feel at ease. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, I said as we settled into comfortable chairs in her consultation room. Children in crisis are always a priority, she replied simply. Tell me what's happening with your family. Once again, I recounted the events since Brooke's call, though this time focusing more on the children's reactions than the legal and financial details. I described Maddie's precocious insights and protective instincts toward her brother, Liam's confusion and fear of abandonment, and my concerns about how Eric's departure would affect their development. Dr. Fraser listened attentively, occasionally making notes. What you're describing is a traumatic disruption to their sense of security, she said when I finished. Children derive much of their feeling of safety from the predictability of their home environment. When that suddenly changed, especially in a way that involves betrayal by a trusted parent, the impact can be significant. How do I help them? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since that phone call. First, by doing exactly what you're doing now, seeking support for them and maintaining as much stability as possible in other areas of their lives. Continuing school routines, preserving friendships and activities, keeping the family home as their primary residence. These all help create a sense of continuity amid change. She outlined a potential approach that involved both individual sessions for each child and family sessions that could eventually include Eric, if appropriate. Children need space to express their feelings without fear of hurting either parent, she explained. Individual therapy provides that safe space. Family sessions, on the other hand, help establish new patterns of communication and interaction. What about Eric's partner? I asked, still unable to use Brooke's name without a surge of anger. He seems to expect the children to accept her presence in their lives immediately. Dr. Fraser's expression grew concerned. That would be inadvisable from a psychological perspective. Children need time to process the end of their parents' relationship before being asked to form relationships with new partners. Rushing that process can create resistance and resentment that may persist for years. So I'm right to push back on that expectation? Absolutely. In fact, I'd be happy to provide a professional recommendation to that effect if it would be helpful in your legal proceedings. By the time I left Dr. Fraser's office, I had scheduled initial appointments for both children and armed myself with resources on helping them navigate divorce. The combination of legal and psychological strategies gave me a roadmap through the chaos. Not an easy path, certainly, but a navigable one. As I drove home, my mind cataloged the progress of the past 48 hours. From the shattering moment of Brooke's call to now, I had assembled a team of allies, gathered critical evidence, initiated legal proceedings, and secured psychological support for my children. Though the pain remained raw, and the challenges ahead daunting, I no longer felt helpless in the face of Eric's betrayal. He had spent a year secretly dismantling our family. I had spent 2 days strategically preparing to rebuild it, stronger, more resilient, and ultimately better off without. The man who had proven himself unworthy of our trust. By Thursday afternoon, just 2 days after Brooke's devastating phone call, the machinery of divorce was already in motion. Rachel's paralegal had emailed draft court filings for my review, each document meticulously crafted to protect my interests and those of my children. I'd scheduled appointments with our family doctor to discuss potential stress-related health impacts, contacted the children's school counselor to alert her to our family situation, and opened a new checking account, in my name only. But one crucial conversation remained, the one I'd been dreading most. "It's time to call Mom and Dad," Natalie reminded me gently as we sat at the kitchen island, reviewing the financial spreadsheet she'd created to track expenses moving forward. "They need to hear this from you, not through the grapevine." I nodded, knowing she was right. Our parents, retired educators now living in Arizona, were devoted grandparents who spoke to the children weekly via video chat. They had always adored Eric, welcoming him into the family with unreserved warmth. This news would devastate them. "I'll do it now," I decided, reaching for my phone. "Before I lose my nerve." Natalie squeezed my shoulder. "Want me to stay? Please." My mother answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the untroubled cheerfulness of someone whose world remains intact. "Vanessa, what a nice surprise. We were just talking about you. Dad found those photos from Maddie's kindergarten graduation." The casual normalcy of her greeting made what I had to say even more difficult. "Mom," I began, my voice catching slightly. "I need to tell you and Dad something important. Is he there with you?" Her tone shifted immediately, maternal instinct detecting the strain in my words. "Robert," she called. "Come to the phone. It's Vanessa." To me, she added, "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are the children all right?" "The kids are physically fine," I assured her quickly. But something's happened. When my father joined the call, I took a deep breath and forced the words out. Eric's been having an affair. For about a year. He moved out Tuesday night. He's living with another woman now. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's voice, suddenly small. "Oh, Vanessa. What do you need?" My father's question was direct, practical, his standard response to any family crisis. "Should we come out there?" Their immediate shift to support rather than shock touched me deeply. "Not yet," I replied. "Natalie's here, and I've already met with a lawyer. We've got things under control for now. But I thought you should know, especially since you talk to the kids so often. They're aware of what's happening." "Those poor babies," my mother murmured. "How are they taking it?" I explained the children's reactions, Dr. Fraser's involvement, and the steps we were taking to provide stability during the upheaval. As I spoke, I could hear my mother's muffled sobs in the background, my father's murmured words of comfort to her. "I still can't believe it," she said when I finished. "Eric always seemed so devoted to your family. What happened?" "Her name is Brooke," I said, the words still bitter on my tongue. "She works at the hospital. They've apparently been seeing each other since last spring." My father's voice hardened. "So while he was telling us how proud he was of your graphic design business taking off, how wonderful you were with the children, he was." He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "I want to wring his neck," my father stated with uncharacteristic vehemence. My dad, a former high school principal known for his measured temperament, rarely expressed anger so bluntly. "Get in line," Natalie muttered beside me, loud enough for my parents to hear. "Natalie's there?" my mother asked. "Oh, thank goodness. You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'm not alone," I assured her. "I've got Natalie, my friend Patricia, and a whole team of professionals helping navigate this. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor." "Anything," my father responded instantly. "I need to focus on the legal process and the children right now. Could you handle telling Aunt Susan and Uncle David? And maybe coordinate letting the extended family know? I just can't face repeating this story over and over." My mother's voice strengthened, her natural organizational skills activating. "Of course we will. We'll make sure everyone knows to support you without overwhelming you with questions, and we'll be ready to come out whenever you need us, for the custody hearing, or just for moral support." Their unconditional backing brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. "I love you both." "We're so proud of how you're handling this," my father said firmly. "And remember, you are not defined by Eric's choices. You are still the same remarkable woman you've always been." After ending the call, I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing their validation. Then I turned to Natalie. "One down, 1, 2, go." The second dreaded conversation couldn't be delegated, informing my small team of freelance designers about potential disruptions to our workflow. Over the past 3 years, I'd built a modest but growing graphic design business specializing in branding for small businesses. I employed 2 part-time designers, both working mothers who valued the flexibility I offered. I'd scheduled a video call with them for 3 p.m. just before the children would return from school. As I set up my laptop in the home office, I rehearsed how to explain the situation professionally without oversharing personal details. Jordan and Melissa joined the call punctually, their friendly faces appearing on screen with no idea of the bombshell I was about to drop. "Thanks for making time on short notice," I began. "I wanted to speak with you directly about some personal circumstances that might impact our work in the coming weeks." Their expressions grew concerned as I continued. "My husband and I are separating, and I've initiated divorce proceedings. While I'm committed to maintaining our client relationships and meeting all deadlines, there may be times when I need to adjust my availability due to legal meetings or family obligations." Both women responded with immediate support. Melissa, who had gone through a divorce herself 2 years earlier, offered practical suggestions for managing client expectations during personal crisis. Jordan volunteered to take on additional client communication responsibilities if needed. "The most important thing," Melissa emphasized, "is that you set boundaries now, before you're overwhelmed. Clients will understand temporary adjustments far better than missed deadlines or communication lapses." We spent the next 30 minutes reorganizing our project management system, implementing backup protocols, and identifying which upcoming deadlines might need renegotiation. By the end of the call, we had created a resilient work plan that would allow me to focus on personal priorities while preserving my business's reputation and income. "Thank you both," I said sincerely as we prepared to end the call. "I can't express how much your support means right now." "We're more than colleagues," Jordan replied warmly. "We're a team. Whatever you need, just ask." After the call, I updated my business continuity spreadsheet, adding columns for potential income fluctuations and contingency planning. The graphic design business represented approximately 35% of our household income, not insignificant, but also not enough to maintain our current lifestyle without Eric's contribution. Financial reality would eventually necessitate difficult decisions about the house, the children's activities, perhaps even my business model. But those decisions didn't need to be made today. Today was about securing foundations and establishing support systems for the challenging months ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Need to get more of my things tomorrow evening. Okay to come by around 7? The message was coolly practical, as if he were a casual acquaintance rather than the man who had shared my bed for 15 years. I responded with equal detachment. "Children will be home. Not appropriate timing. Saturday morning instead?" His reply came quickly. "Saturday works. We'll come at 10. Need to talk about financial arrangements, too." I showed the exchange to Natalie. "What do you think he means by financial arrangements?" She frowned. Could be anything from genuine concern about supporting the children to attempting to negotiate a favorable split of assets outside the legal process. Either way, don't discuss anything substantial without Rachel present. I wasn't planning to, I assured her. In fact, I was thinking I should ask Rachel to have someone here during his visit. "Smart," Natalie nodded. "You don't want to be alone with him, especially during conversations about money." I texted Rachel about the situation, and she responded promptly. "I'll send David, our paralegal, to be present. No discussions of specifics. Refer all financial questions to our office. We'll formally serve him with papers during this visit, if that's acceptable to you." The prospect of Eric being served divorce papers while collecting his belongings felt both surreal and oddly satisfying. "That's acceptable," I replied. With that arranged, I turned my attention to another pressing concern: financial security. Though Rachel had filed for an emergency injunction to prevent Eric from making major financial moves, our everyday finances remained intertwined through joint accounts and shared credit cards. Natalie had already helped me establish a new checking account in my name only, transferring a reasonable portion of our joint funds to cover immediate expenses. Now we sat together at the dining room table, methodically working through financial separation strategies. "You need to remove him as an authorized user on your credit cards," Natalie advised, pointing to the account statements spread before us. "And you should probably freeze your credit to prevent any new accounts being opened." I nodded, adding these tasks to my growing to-do list. "What about the mortgage payment? It's scheduled to auto-draft from the joint account on the 1st. Let it process normally for now," she suggested. "The court will eventually determine responsibility for the mortgage during the proceedings. In the meantime, maintaining payments protects your credit rating and equity position." We worked through each account methodically: utilities, insurance policies, investment accounts, streaming services, even the children's activity fees. Each represented another strand in the complex web of connections that 15 years of marriage had created, each requiring careful consideration. "What about health insurance?" I asked suddenly, a new worry surfacing. "We're all on his policy through the hospital." Natalie made a note. "That's something Rachel should address immediately. Until the divorce is finalized, he can't remove you or the children from his insurance. That would be considered financial abandonment. But you should look into options through your business as well, for when the divorce is finalized." The doorbell rang, interrupting our financial planning session. Puzzled, we weren't expecting anyone. I went to answer it, Natalie following closely behind. Standing on my porch was a woman I'd never met, holding a large folder. "Vanessa Hendricks?" she asked formally. "Yes." "I'm Diane Levinson, from Horizon Real Estate." She extended the folder toward me. "Eric asked me to drop off these documents regarding the property on Lakeside Drive." I stared at her blankly. "What property on Lakeside Drive?" The real estate agent's confident expression faltered. "The condominium he and Brooke are purchasing? He said you needed copies of the closing documents for your records." Beside me, Natalie made a small, strangled sound of disbelief. I maintained my composure with effort. "I see. And did Eric explain that we're in the process of divorcing? That any property purchased while we're still legally married could be considered marital property?" Diane's professional demeanor cracked completely. "Divorcing? He didn't mention. He said you were aware of the purchase." "I'm aware now," I replied calmly, accepting the folder. "Thank you for bringing these by. I'm sure my attorney will find them very interesting." As she retreated hastily to her car, I turned to Natalie, holding up the folder with a grim smile. "Well, that was convenient. Looks like Eric just handed us exactly what we needed." "Straight from the opposing team's playbook," Natalie agreed, shaking her head in amazement. "How could he possibly think this was a good idea?" I laughed. A genuine sound that surprised even me. "Because he still thinks I'm the trusting, compliant wife who wouldn't question his decisions. He has no idea who he's dealing with now." And in that moment of unexpected levity amid the storm, I realized a fundamental truth. Eric's betrayal had indeed changed me, but not in the way he might have expected. Instead of breaking me, it had revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed. A capacity for strategic thinking, resilient adaptation, and fierce protection of what mattered most. As I added the closing documents to the growing file of evidence for Rachel, I felt something I hadn't expected to find so soon after the devastating phone call that had started this journey. A glimmer of confidence in my ability to not merely survive Eric's betrayal, but eventually to thrive despite it. Saturday morning arrived with a tense energy permeating the house. Eric was scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. to collect more of his belongings and, unknowingly, to be served with divorce papers. I had sent the children to a previously scheduled playdate at their friend's house, wanting to shield them from both the awkwardness of their father packing up his life and the legal confrontation that would follow. David Torres, Rachel's paralegal, arrived at 9:30, a slim folder tucked discreetly under his arm and an air of professional detachment about him. At 29, he was younger than I'd expected, but his quiet confidence suggested experience beyond his years. "Mrs. Hendricks," he greeted me formally. "Rachel asked me to give you these." He handed me a business card with his direct number. "I'll remain unobtrusive until needed. My primary role is to witness any conversations and ensure proper service of the documents." "Thank you for coming," I said, leading him to the kitchen where Natalie was brewing coffee. "Would you like some coffee while we wait?" "That would be great," he replied, setting his folder on the island counter. "Rachel mentioned your husband doesn't know he's being served today?" I shook my head. "No, he thinks he's just coming. To collect more of his things and to discuss financial arrangements, whatever that means." David nodded thoughtfully. "In my experience, that usually means one of two things. Either a genuine concern about continued financial support for the family, or, more commonly, an attempt to negotiate favorable terms outside the legal process." "That's exactly what we suspected," Natalie interjected, sliding a mug of coffee toward him. "The most important thing," David advised, "is to avoid any substantive financial discussions. Even seemingly casual agreements can complicate proceedings later. If he raises financial topics, direct him to contact Rachel." The doorbell rang at precisely 10 a.m. Eric had always been punctual, a trait I once found endearing but now seemed merely mechanical. Another aspect of the persona he had carefully maintained. I opened the door to find him standing alone. dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater I had given him last Christmas. The sight of him wearing my gift sent an unexpected pang through me. "Morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thanks for arranging this." "Of course." I stepped aside to let him enter. "The children are at the Petersons for a playdate. I thought that would be easier." He nodded, glancing around the foyer as if suddenly seeing it as a visitor rather than a resident. "That's probably best. I've brought some boxes for my things." "You should know we have company," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "My sister is here, and also a representative from my attorney's office." Eric stiffened visibly. "Your attorney? You've already hired an attorney?" "Yes. Given the circumstances, it seemed prudent." A flash of irritation crossed his features. "That seems premature. I thought we could discuss arrangements privately, like reasonable adults." "Like the reasonable adult who was planning to leave his family without warning?" Natalie appeared in the hallway, arms crossed. "Or the one who's been withdrawing money from joint accounts and house hunting with his girlfriend." "Natalie," I cautioned quietly, "let's keep this civil." Eric's jaw tightened. "I see you've been busy gathering your allies and building your narrative." "There's no narrative," I replied evenly. "Just facts. Facts that are now documented by my legal team." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty replacing the confident indignation. Good. He needed to understand that I was no longer the trusting wife he could easily manipulate. "My things are mostly in the bedroom and office," he said after a moment, changing tactics. "I'll try to be quick." "Take the time you need," I responded, matching his businesslike tone. "David will accompany you upstairs if you don't mind." "Why? Do you think I'm going to steal something?" The question came out sharper than I think he intended. "It's standard procedure when one party has moved out," David interjected smoothly, stepping forward and extending his hand. "David Torres from Williams, Draper and Associates. I'm just here to observe and assist if needed." Eric reluctantly shook his hand, clearly thrown off balance by this development. "Fine. Whatever makes everyone comfortable." As Eric and David headed upstairs, Natalie raised an eyebrow at me. "That went better than expected." "So far," I agreed, "but he hasn't been served yet." For the next 30 minutes, we heard the sounds of drawers opening and closing, closet doors sliding, items being packed into boxes. I remained in the kitchen, reviewing emails from Rachel about the financial disclosures Eric would be required to complete once served. The relative calm was shattered by the sound of Eric's raised voice from upstairs. "What the hell is this?" Footsteps pounded down the stairs, and Eric appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a stack of papers, printouts of the emails we had discovered between him and Brooke, including discussions about the condo purchase and their future together. "You went through my emails?" he demanded, his face flushed with anger. "That's a violation of privacy. You had no right—" "No right?" I interrupted, my own anger finally breaking through the calm facade I had maintained. "You were planning to abandon your family, Eric. You were making major financial decisions that affected all of us without my knowledge or consent. As your wife and the mother of your children, I had every right to protect our interests." "Those were private communications," he insisted, waving the papers. "This is completely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" Natalie countered. "Is conducting a year-long affair while deceiving your family. What's inappropriate is siphoning money from joint accounts to fund your new life with your mistress." Eric turned to me, ignoring Natalie entirely. "Is this why you have a lawyer? You're planning to use these private emails to extort me? To take everything I've worked for?" The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. "Extort you? I'm trying to protect what's left of our children's security after you demolished it with your choices." David had quietly descended the stairs during this exchange, the slim folder now open in his hands. "Mr. Hendricks," he said formally, This seems like an appropriate moment to complete my primary task today. He extended the folder toward Eric. You are hereby served with a petition for divorce, a motion for temporary custody of your minor children, and an emergency injunction prohibiting any major financial transactions or asset transfers pending. Court proceedings. Eric stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. You're serving me now? While I'm collecting my belongings? It's a convenience, really, David replied with professional detachment. Saves our process server a trip. Eric reluctantly took the documents, flipping through them with growing agitation. Full financial disclosure? Temporary custody? Injunction? This is completely unnecessary. I've always intended to support my family. Your actions suggest otherwise, I said quietly. The secret bank account with Brooke, the condo purchase, the withdrawals from our savings, none of that indicates a commitment to supporting this family. His head snapped up. How do you know about the condo? We only signed the purchase agreement this week. I gestured to the dining room table, where the folder Diane had delivered was prominently displayed. Your real estate agent was quite helpful, actually. She dropped off the closing documents yesterday, thinking I was fully aware of the purchase. The color drained from Eric's face as the full implications set in. You had no right to accept those documents. I had every right, I corrected him. We are still legally married. Any major purchase you make remains part of our marital estate until a divorce decree states otherwise. Your real estate agent actually did us both a favor by ensuring everything is properly documented. Eric ran a hand through his hair, his confident demeanor crumbling as he realized how thoroughly his careful plans had been exposed. This isn't what I wanted, he said finally. I didn't want things to get ugly or litigious. What exactly did you want, Eric? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. Did you think you could simply walk away from 15 years of marriage with no consequences? That you could build a new life with Brooke while keeping portions of this one that were convenient for you? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I wanted to be fair, to do right by the kids, to support you all financially. While living with another woman in a condo you purchased together using our joint resources, I added, while expecting our children to immediately accept your girlfriend into their lives, while hiding financial transactions that affected their future security. Put like that, the contradictions in his position were impossible to defend. Eric fell silent, staring at the legal documents in his hands. Mr. Hendricks, David said after a moment. You have been formally served with these papers. You have 21 days to respond through legal counsel. The emergency injunction takes effect immediately, prohibiting any transfers of marital assets, exceeding $1,000 without court approval. I need to finish getting my things, Eric said flatly, any pretense of amicable discussion gone. Of course. I stepped aside to let him pass. David will continue to accompany you, as previously arranged. As Eric returned upstairs, Natalie moved closer to me. You okay? She whispered. I nodded, surprised to find it was true. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but clarifying. Seeing Eric's reaction to being held accountable had only confirmed what I already knew. He had expected to dictate the terms of our family's dissolution, to maintain control even as he abandoned his responsibilities. When Eric returned downstairs, 30 minutes later, his demeanor had shifted again. The initial anger had given way to something more calculated. He set down the boxes of clothing and personal items by the door, then turned to me. Vanessa, can we talk privately for a moment? Just you and me? I glanced at David, who gave a slight shake of his head. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied. Anything you need to say can be said with witnesses present. This is ridiculous, Eric muttered. We're still technically married. We've known each other for 20 years, and suddenly we need legal intermediaries to have a simple conversation. That changed when you decided to lead a double life, I pointed out. When you chose deception over honesty, manipulation over... straightforward communication. He sighed heavily. I made mistakes, I admit that. But escalating this into full legal warfare isn't going to help anyone, especially the kids. The mention of the children ignited a fresh wave of anger within me. Don't you dare use Maddie and Liam to justify your behavior or manipulate this situation. If you were truly concerned about their welfare, you wouldn't have been planning to abandon them without warning. I wasn't abandoning them, Eric protested. I was going to maintain a relationship with them, see them regularly, while expecting them to immediately accept the woman who helped destroy their family, I finished for him. The woman you've apparently bought property with and are planning to marry, based on your planner entries. Eric's expression revealed his shock at how much I knew. You've been through my planner too? Is there anything you haven't invaded? I did what was necessary to protect my children's interests. I replied unapologetically. Something you failed to do while pursuing your relationship with Brooke. He stared at me for a long moment, seemingly reassessing the woman standing before him. The compliant, trusting wife he had expected to find had been replaced by someone more formidable, more resolute. This isn't you, Vanessa, he said finally. The legal maneuvering, the investigations, the hostility. This isn't who you are. You're right, I agreed, surprising him. This isn't who I was before Tuesday night, before I discovered that my husband of 15 years had been systematically deceiving me while planning his exit. Consider this the person I've become in response to your choices, Eric. I didn't want this transformation any more than I wanted this divorce, but here we are. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from him. I'll have my lawyer contact. Yours, he said, picking up his boxes. Please tell the kids I'll call them tonight. I will, I promised, opening the door for him. And Eric? Dr. Fraser, their psychologist, has recommended they not be introduced to Brooke until they've had time to process these changes. I expect you to respect that professional guidance during your interactions with them. He paused in the doorway, clearly wanting to argue but recognizing the losing position. Fine. Whatever's best for the kids. As the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, a complex mix of emotions washing over me, relief that the confrontation was over, satisfaction that the legal process was in motion, lingering anger at his attempts to justify his actions, and an unexpected twinge of sadness for what had been lost. You handled that impressively, David commented, slipping his fountain pen back into his jacket pocket after making final notes. Most clients find the service process much more emotionally challenging. Don't get me wrong, I replied, pushing away from the door. I'm devastated that my marriage has ended this way. But the person I'm grieving isn't the man who just left. It's the man I thought I was married to, and those are two very different people. As David gathered his things to leave, Natalie wrapped an arm around my shoulders. One major hurdle. Cleared, she said encouragingly. How are you feeling? I considered the question seriously. Strangely empowered, I admitted. For the first time since Tuesday night, I feel like I'm not just reacting to Eric's choices. I'm actively shaping what comes next, and that makes all the difference. Sunday morning dawned with an unexpected sense of peacefulness. For the first time since Brooke's devastating phone call, I woke without that initial moment of disorientation, that split second where reality hadn't yet reasserted itself and life still seemed normal. Instead, I opened my eyes fully aware of my new circumstances and, surprisingly, feeling equipped to face them. The children were still asleep, the house quiet in that precious weekend stillness. Natalie had finally returned to her own apartment yesterday evening after making me promise to call at the first sign of trouble. Her absence left a void, but also created space for reflection I hadn't been able to afford in the chaotic days since Eric's departure. Wrapping myself in a robe, I padded downstairs to make coffee, savoring the simple pleasure of moving through my kitchen unobserved. As the coffee brewed, I settled at the dining room table with my journal, a practice I had abandoned years ago amid the busy demands of family life. Who am I now? I wrote, the question both terrifying and liberating. Who do I want to become? Through this experience? The woman I had been before Tuesday night, trusting, focused on family harmony, defining myself largely through my roles as wife and mother, had been fundamentally altered by Eric's betrayal. That version of me had operated under assumptions that had proven catastrophically false. The ground beneath that woman had crumbled irreparably. But rather than feeling diminished by this forced evolution, I found myself curious about who might emerge from the ruins. The person who had methodically gathered evidence, secured legal protection, and stood firm against Eric's manipulations wasn't entirely unfamiliar. She had always existed within me, but circumstances had never demanded her emergence until now. My values, I continued writing, trying to articulate the core principles that would guide this next chapter. What matters most to me? The children, obviously. Their security, stability, and emotional well-being would remain my highest priority. But beyond that fundamental commitment, what would shape my decisions moving forward? Authenticity, I wrote after consideration. The pain of discovering Eric's double life had crystallized my aversion to deception in all its forms. I would no longer accommodate convenient fictions or comfortable lies, either from others or within myself. Self-sufficiency. The vulnerability created by financial entanglement with Eric had exposed the danger of dependence. While I couldn't immediately achieve complete financial independence, I could work steadily toward greater self-reliance, integrity. Even as the divorce proceedings turned adversarial, I wanted to maintain my own moral compass, fighting for fair treatment didn't mean abandoning ethical principles. As I contemplated these values, I realized how profoundly Eric's betrayal had clarified my priorities. The shock and pain had stripped away non-essential concerns, leaving a sharper, more defined sense of what truly mattered. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my reflection. Maddie appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, already looking so grown up in her stance and expression. "Morning, Mom," she said, moving to the coffee maker and pouring herself a small cup, a weekend indulgence I allowed her, heavily diluted with milk. "You're up early." "Just thinking," I replied, closing my journal. "How did you sleep?" She shrugged, joining me at the table. "Okay, I guess. I had a weird dream about Dad and that woman." I kept my expression neutral despite the internal wince at the mention of Brooke. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really." She sipped her coffee, then looked up at me with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything. "You seem different today." "Different how?" "I don't know. Calmer, maybe? Less sad?" She searched for the right words. "More like yourself." The observation startled me with its accuracy. "I think maybe I am," I acknowledged. "I've been so focused on handling the practical issues that I haven't had much time to think about how I'm feeling. This morning, I finally had a chance to reflect." Maddie nodded seriously. "Dr. Fraser says reflection is important, processing emotions instead of just reacting to them." I smiled at her mature parroting of therapeutic concepts. "She's right. And what have you been reflecting on?" My daughter traced the rim of her mug with her finger, considering the question. "I keep thinking about family, about what makes people family. Is it just blood or living together, or is it something else?" The philosophical depth of her question caught me off guard. "That's a profound thing to be thinking about," I said carefully. "What conclusions have you reached?" "I think it's about choice," she said after a moment, "about choosing to show up for each other, to be reliable. Dad chose not to do that anymore. He chose her instead of us. So even though he's still my dad, our family is different now." The insight in her words brought tears to my eyes. That's very wise, Maddie. Family is absolutely about the choices we make every day to love and support each other. That's why I don't want to meet her, she continued, her voice hardening slightly. She chose to be with someone who already had a family. She didn't care about breaking us apart. I weighed my response carefully, wanting to respect Maddie's feelings without demonizing Brooke in ways that might complicate future interactions. Relationships are complicated, sweetheart. While I understand your anger toward Brooke, and I share it in many ways, the primary responsibility was your father's. He made vows to our family that he chose to break. I know, she sighed. Dr. Fraser said that too, but it's easier to be mad at her than at Dad. The simple honesty of her statement pierced my heart. It is, isn't it? Being angry at your father is much more painful. Maddie's eyes filled with tears. I miss who he used to be, before all this. I reached across the table to take her hand. Me too. And it's okay to miss that person while still being angry about his choices. We sat in silence for a moment, this shared grief creating a new kind of intimacy between us. Then Maddie straightened, wiping her eyes with her sleeve in a gesture that reminded me poignantly of her younger self. What happens now? She asked practically. With the house and school and everything. For now, nothing changes, I assured her. You and Liam will stay in this house with me. You'll continue at your current schools. Dad will visit with you regularly, but separately from Brooke for the time being. And after that, when the divorce is final? Her awareness of the legal process caught me off guard again. Some things might change then. We might need to move to a smaller house eventually, and financial arrangements will be different, but the most important things won't change. How much we love you, our commitment to your happiness and security. She seemed to accept this, though I could see questions still swirling behind her eyes. Is Aunt Natalie coming back today? Not today. She needed to get back to her own place for a while, but she'll visit often. Good, Maddie nodded. I like having her here. She makes you laugh. The observation was remarkably perceptive. Natalie did indeed bring levity to situations that might otherwise overwhelm me with their gravity, a gift I hadn't fully appreciated until this crisis. She does, doesn't she? I smiled. Maybe we should invite her for dinner later this week. I'd like that. Maddie finished her coffee and stood. I'm going to get dressed. Liam and I were talking about riding bikes to the park today. Is that okay? Absolutely, I agreed, grateful for their initiative in finding normal activities. Just be back for lunch. As she bounded upstairs with renewed energy, I returned to my journal, adding another value to my list. Resilience. Not just my own, but fostering it in my children as well. Their ability to adapt to these dramatic changes would shape their approach to challenges throughout their lives. The rest of the morning unfolded with an almost surreal normalcy. Liam woke hungry and cheerful, seemingly less burdened by our new reality than his sister. We made pancakes together, a Sunday tradition that felt comforting in its familiarity. By mid-morning, both children were off on their bikes, helmets securely fastened, their momentary freedom from our family drama evident in their animated chatter as they pedaled away. Alone again, I turned to a task I had been postponing. Examining my professional future. My graphic design business, while successful on a part-time scale, would need to expand significantly if it were to support our family long-term. I opened my laptop and began a systematic assessment of my client base, pricing structure, and potential growth opportunities. In the past, I had deliberately limited my workload to accommodate Eric's career and the children's needs. That calculus had changed dramatically. With Eric no longer contributing to daily parenting, I would need help with childcare if I increased my working hours. The financial implications were complex, but not insurmountable. I created a spreadsheet projecting income scenarios based on different client acquisition rates and service packages. Even under optimistic projections, Maintaining our current lifestyle would be challenging. Hard decisions about the house, private, lessons for the children, and other luxuries loomed on the horizon. Yet, rather than overwhelming me, the exercise felt empowering. These were my decisions to make now, based on my values and priorities rather than compromises negotiated with Eric. If we needed to downsize our home to maintain the children's activities, that would be my choice. If I needed to rethink my business, model to create more sustainable income, I could do that without considering Eric's preferences or convenience. As I worked, I realized I was experiencing something unexpected, a nascent sense of possibility amid the wreckage of my marriage. The path forward was difficult and strewn with obstacles, but it was mine to navigate according to my own compass. My phone rang, interrupting these reflections. The caller ID showed Patricia's name. "Hey," I answered, saving my financial projections. "How are you?" "I'm fine, but that's not why I'm calling," she replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I just heard something you need to know. It's about Eric and Brooke." My stomach clenched instinctively. "What is it?" "I ran into Kelly from the hospital fundraising committee at the grocery store. She asked about you, said she was sorry to hear about your situation." Patricia paused. "Apparently, Eric and Brooke announced their engagement to the hospital staff on Friday. They're planning a December wedding." The information landed like a physical blow, momentarily stealing my breath. A December wedding? But our divorce won't even be final by then. "I know," Patricia said grimly. "It seems they're either being wildly optimistic about the timeline or planning to announce a postponement later. But they're already talking about it openly." I closed my eyes, absorbing this fresh betrayal. 4 days after leaving his family, Eric was publicly celebrating his future with the woman who had helped destroy our marriage. The callousness was staggering. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I needed to know before the children heard it from someone else." "I'm so sorry, Vanessa, the cruelty of it. I just can't understand how he could do this." Neither could I. But as the initial shock subsided, something unexpected happened. Rather than crushing me with fresh pain, the news crystallized my resolve further. Each revelation of Eric's true character only confirmed the rightness of my path forward, without him. "Actually," I said slowly, "this helps clarify things for me. The man who would announce his engagement while his wife and children are still reeling from his abandonment is not someone whose good opinion I need to value anymore. He's showing everyone exactly who he is." Patricia's silence suggested surprise at my reaction. "You're taking this remarkably well." "I'm not saying it doesn't hurt," I clarified, "but it reinforces what I've been realizing all morning, that the future depends on my choices now, not his, and I choose not to let his callousness define my path forward." After ending the call, I returned to my journal, adding one final value to my list: self-respect. No matter what Eric did or how public this humiliation became, I would maintain my dignity and self-worth. His choices reflected on him, not on me. By the time the children returned from their bike ride, rosy-cheeked and hungry, I had completed my transformation from shocked victim to determined architect of our future. The pain remained, as did the challenges ahead, but they were now contextualized, within a framework of purpose and principle. "Did you have fun?" I asked as they burst through the door. "So much fun!" Liam exclaimed. "We saw ducks at the pond and this huge dog that looked like a bear." Maddie studied my face with that perceptive gaze of hers. "You've been working," she observed, noting the laptop open on the dining table. "Are we gonna be okay, Mom? Like, with money and stuff?" "We are absolutely going to be okay," I assured her with newfound confidence. "Things might change, but we'll face those changes together, as a family. That's a promise." And for the first time since Brooke's devastating call, I fully believed those words myself. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, the perfect spring day belying the storm I was about to face in court. I stood before the mirror in a navy blue dress Rachel had advised as appropriately conservative without appearing somber, my reflection, revealing a woman I was still getting to know, someone with determination in her eyes and resolve in her posture. "You look perfect," my mother said from the doorway. "Professional, composed, but still yourself." "I don't feel composed," I admitted, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my skirt. "I keep thinking about facing Eric across the courtroom." She crossed to me, adjusting my simple pearl necklace, her own, loaned for the occasion. "Remember what your father always says. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the face of it." Downstairs, my father was helping the children prepare for school, his booming voice reciting multiplication facts with Liam while Maddie packed lunches for both of them. The domestic scene, so ordinary yet so precious, steeled my resolve. This is what I was fighting for. Not vengeance against Eric, but stability for these children who deserved continuity amid chaos. "All ready?" Natalie asked as I descended the stairs, car keys already in hand. She would be accompanying me to court while my parents took the children to school and then waited at home. Patricia would join us at the courthouse, having taken the day off work to provide moral support. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, kissing Maddie and Liam goodbye with reassurances that everything would be fine, that this was just a meeting to help the grown-ups sort things out. "Will Dad be there?" Liam asked, his small face pinched with worry. "Yes, he will," I answered honestly. "But you don't need to think about any of that. Just have a good day at school, and Grandma and Grandpa will pick you up afterward." "We'll make spaghetti for dinner," my father announced with exaggerated enthusiasm. "With those giant meatballs you like." Liam's face brightened at this promise, the simple pleasure of a favorite meal temporarily eclipsing his concerns. Maddie, more perceptive as always, hugged me tightly and whispered, "Show them how strong you are, Mom." The 20-minute drive to the courthouse passed in nervous silence, Natalie occasionally squeezing my hand at stoplights. We met Patricia and Rachel in the courthouse lobby, a final strategy session conducted in hushed tones beneath the echoing marble dome. "Remember, let me do the talking," Rachel reminded me. "Answer questions directly and factually. No emotional outbursts no matter what Eric's attorney claims. The judge needs to see you as the stable, reasonable parent." I nodded, my throat too dry for speech. As we approached the courtroom, I saw them, Eric and Brooke, standing close together near a distinguished-looking man I assumed was his attorney. The sight of them together, in public, hit me with unexpected force. Despite knowing about their relationship for weeks now, seeing them as a unit in this formal setting made it jarringly real. Brooke spotted me first, her expression shifting, from confidence to discomfort. She nudged Eric, whose face registered a complex mix of emotions when he turned to see me approaching with my own entourage of supporters. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw something unexpected. Uncertainty, perhaps even shame, flickering beneath his practiced composure. I looked away first, not out of weakness, but from a sudden realization. His opinion no longer mattered, to me. The man who had shared my bed, parented my children, and broken every promise we had made to each other was now just another adversary in a legal proceeding. The epiphany was both liberating and sad. "Vanessa." Eric stepped forward, hand extended awkwardly. "You look well." The banality of the greeting after everything that had happened between us was almost comical. I accepted his handshake briefly, noting the unfamiliar cologne that clung to his skin, another small reminder of his new life. "Eric," I acknowledged simply, then turned to Rachel to continue our conversation, effectively dismissing him. Inside the courtroom, we took our places at opposing tables, the physical distance between us a tangible representation of the emotional chasm that had opened in our lives. Brooke sat in the gallery behind Eric, her presence a silent assertion of her new role in his life. Judge Harriet Lamorne entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the scene before her. Case number 47892, Hendricks vs. Hendricks, the bailiff announced, officially beginning proceedings that would shape our future. For the next 2 hours, attorneys presented arguments, evidence was submitted, and Judge Lamorne asked penetrating questions that suggested she had thoroughly reviewed our filings. Eric's attorney presented their case for immediate joint physical custody and sale of the family home, arguing that Eric's relationship with the children would be irreparably damaged by limited access. "Your Honor," Rachel countered when her turn came. "We have submitted Dr. Fraser's professional assessment clearly stating that stability and continuity are paramount for the children's emotional well-being at this time. Forcing them to alternate weeks between households and immediately introducing them to their father's new partner would create unnecessary psychological distress." Judge Lamorne turned to Eric. "Mr. Hendricks, am I correct in understanding that you relocated to live with Ms. Reynolds just 3 weeks ago, after 15 years of marriage?" "Yes, Your Honor," Eric replied, his confident tone wavering slightly. "And you believe it's in your children's best interest to immediately spend half their time in this new living arrangement?" "I believe children need both parents, Your Honor. I'm still their father, regardless of the circumstances." The judge's expression revealed nothing. "Ms. Hendricks," she turned to me, "would you please stand?" I rose on shaky legs, heart pounding. "I see from Dr. Fraser's report that you've arranged therapy for both children and maintained their school and activity routines despite these difficult circumstances. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "Their stability has been my primary concern." "And your position on Mr. Hendricks's continued relationship with the children?" This was the critical question, the one that would reveal my character to this woman who held our future in her hands. I took a deep breath, conscious of Eric's gaze fixed on me. "I believe the children need and deserve a strong relationship with their father," I stated firmly. "I have never and would never attempt to undermine that bond. My concern is only with the pace and manner of transitions, not with the relationship itself." Something in the judge's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. You may be seated." After both sides presented their final arguments, Judge Lamorne called a brief recess to review all submissions before rendering her decision. Those 20 minutes in the hallway felt like hours, each passing second stretching my nerves tighter. "You did beautifully," Rachel assured me, "especially your answer about Eric's relationship with the children. That demonstrated exactly the maturity and child-focused perspective judges look for." When we reconvened, Judge Lamorne wasted no time. "Having reviewed all evidence and arguments presented, I'm prepared to issue temporary orders in this matter." I gripped the edge of the table, my future hanging on her next words. "Regarding custody, I find that the children's best interests are served by maintaining their primary residence with Ms. Hendricks at this time." She turned briefly toward Eric. "Mr. Hendricks will have visitation every other weekend from Friday evening to Sunday evening, plus Wednesday dinners. After 4 months, assuming all goes well, we will revisit the schedule to potentially expand visitation." Relief flooded through me, but I maintained my composed expression as the judge continued. "Regarding the family residence, the children will remain in the home with Ms. Hendricks until final property division is determined. Mr. Hendricks will continue to contribute to the mortgage payment as part of his support obligations." She proceeded to outline financial terms: child support, temporary spousal maintenance, continuation of health insurance coverage, and maintenance of existing accounts pending final divorce proceedings. Each provision aligned closely with what Rachel had requested, creating a framework that would allow the children and me to maintain stability during the divorce process. Finally, Judge Lamorne said, her gaze moving between Eric and me. I'm ordering that both parents and children continue therapy with a follow-up assessment in 4 months. Additionally, Ms. Reynolds is not to be present during visitation for the first 2 months, after which Dr. Fraser will evaluate the children's readiness for introductions. She set down her papers with an air of finality. These orders will remain in effect until modified by the court or until final divorce proceedings conclude. We'll schedule a status hearing for September 15th to reassess the situation. With a sharp rap of her gavel, it was done. The framework for our immediate future had been established, largely in favor of the stability I had prioritized for the children. Eric's face darkened as he conferred with his attorney, clearly displeased with the restrictions regarding Brooke. Behind him, Brooke herself sat rigid, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, I wondered what she had expected from this. Hearing, immediate acceptance into my children's lives? Validation of her relationship with Eric? Whatever it was, Judge Lamorne's orders had delayed it significantly. As we gathered our belongings to leave, Eric approached alone, his attorney tactfully hanging back. Vanessa? His voice was low, controlled. We need to talk about how to make this work for the kids. I agree, I replied, surprising myself. With my calm. They need both of us to put their needs first. I'm not the villain you think I am, he said, a hint of the old Eric, the man I thought I had married, showing through his defensive exterior. I made terrible choices, but I do love our children. Then prove it, I said simply. Not with words or promises, but with consistent actions. That's all that matters now. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, that the power dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the devastated wife seeking his approval or explanation. I was a mother protecting her children's future, an equal party in legal proceedings, a woman who had found her voice amid the ruins of his betrayal. I'll call about Wednesday's dinner, he said finally, backing away. Tell the kids. Tell them I love them. I always do, I assured him, because despite everything, I had never weaponized the children's affection in our conflict. Their relationship with their father was separate from my grievances against my husband. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine warmed my face as I stood on the steps with my support team. Patricia hugged me tightly, while Natalie made immediate calls to my parents with the news. Rachel reviewed next steps, scheduling our follow-up meeting for later that week. How do you feel? Patricia asked as we walked toward the parking garage. I considered the question seriously. Validated, I said finally. Relieved, but mostly empowered. For the first time since Brooke's call, I feel like I'm directing my own life again, not just reacting to Eric's choices. That's the most important victory, Rachel commented, overhearing my response. Legal rulings matter, of course, but reclaiming your sense of agency is what truly begins healing. Driving home with Natalie, I felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of the morning's proceedings. The temporary orders were just that. Temporary. The divorce process would continue for months, with further negotiations, potential setbacks, and unavoidable complexities ahead. But the immediate crisis had been navigated successfully. The foundation for our new reality had been laid. At home, my parents greeted us with anxious expressions that melted into relief when I shared the judge's decisions. My father swept me into a bear hug, while my mother wiped away tears of relief. I knew you'd prevail, my father declared with characteristic certainty. Justice still works sometimes. It's not about winning, Dad, I corrected gently. It's about creating the right environment for the children to heal. Even as I said it, I realized how much my perspective had evolved from those first days of shock and anger. That evening, as promised, we had spaghetti and meatballs, the children blissfully unaware of the legal battles fought on their behalf earlier that day. watching them laugh with their grandparents, engaged in an elaborate story about a classroom mishap. I felt profound gratitude for this moment of normalcy amid our altered circumstances. After they went to bed, I retreated to my bedroom with my journal, needing to process the day's events privately. As I wrote about the hearing, Eric's approach afterward, and my unexpected composure throughout, a realization crystallized. The woman who answered Brooke's call 3 weeks ago no longer exists. She was defined by her marriage, her identity, intertwined with Eric's, her value measured in his validation. The woman who stood in court today is someone new, someone who discovered her strength not despite betrayal but because of it. I didn't choose this path. I would never have willingly subjected my children or myself to this pain. But now that we're here, I can choose who I become through it. I choose resilience over bitterness. I choose growth over stagnation. I choose to build something new rather than merely mourn what was lost. I closed the journal and moved to the window, gazing at the familiar neighborhood now bathed in moonlight. The trees, the houses, the quiet street, all appeared unchanged, though everything in my world had shifted dramatically. There was comfort in that continuity, in the knowledge that some things remained steady even as others transformed beyond. Recognition. 3 weeks ago, a phone call from a stranger had shattered the life I thought I knew. Tonight, I stood amid the fragments, no longer desperately trying to reassemble them into their original form, but instead beginning to create something new, something that reflected the woman I was becoming rather than the one I had been. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be difficult co-parenting negotiations, financial adjustments, emotional setbacks for both me and the children. Eric and Brooke would eventually become a more established couple, requiring new boundaries and accommodations. The legal process would continue with its frustrations and compromises, but for the first time since that devastating dinner, I faced the future not with dread, but with determination. Not as a victim of Eric's betrayal, but as the architect of my own recovery. Not as half of a broken marriage, but as a whole person, in my own right. That transformation, from shattered to sovereign, was the true victory of this day, and no court ruling, no matter how favorable, could match its significance for the journey ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.